Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with Alaska Weather. Once again, it's time for a look at your statewide weather forecast on this 18th of December. We always remind you to take a look at your local forecast information or listen to it on NOAA Weather Radio or your Marine VHF band. You can find it on the internet at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. And of course, there is a wide array of ways to get your forecast information and other weather and Alaska climate news online at Facebook, NWS Alaska, on Twitter, of course, using the hashtag AKwx, and find us on YouTube from NWS Anchorage and NWS Fairbanks. You'll get your daily afternoon map briefing and get kind of the scoop on what's coming your way before we get to Alaska weather time each night. A look out toward southeast is still watching for high winds for about another 30 minutes or so. A high wind warning is in effect there. We're watching for gusts upwards of 60 miles per hour, but the wind should be subsiding as we go through the remainder of the evening hours, and it's likely the high wind warning will be allowed to expire at 6 o'clock. In the meantime, some gusty winds have been seen across the region, and there will be more periods of gusts throughout the daytime tomorrow. It does not look like, though, that a lot of that wind will reach the high wind warning threshold, though, so probably no warnings tomorrow, but check back just in case. Make sure that you're prepared for gusty winds to continue, especially along the coast and the inner waterways as we go into the next couple days, because there's certainly more storms out there. High winds in southeast will subside then, and we're still going to watch for those winds through tomorrow. Continued unsettled pattern in the Gulf of Alaska is expected to last at least into the weekend and probably into early parts of next week. Pacific lows are lined up across the North Pacific and south of the Aleutians. As that happens, it's sending some milder air into south and western Alaska and the western coast itself. However, it is pumping quite a bit of moisture and snow chances into parts of the central and northern Gulf. So we'll keep an eye on how that progresses over the next few days. And I hope you will too, again, at weather.gov/Alaska. Here's a look at the Bering Sea satellite picture and the pretty broad circulation here. You can see the storm track coming in from eastern Asia and pumping each one of these surface disturbances further and further into the Gulf. We've got the low pressure system sitting here across the Gulf itself, and that's just kind of absorbing each one of these new disturbances that's making its way underneath that powerful Pacific jet stream. A loop once again looking at the northern end of this. You can see another area of low pressure sending itself south and west. Also on the northern end of this overall rotation that's moving away from St. Lawrence Island. This is where the strongest winds have been occurring there. Previously that was really affecting the north and western slope and the western tip of the Seward Peninsula with those strong and gusty winds, as well as Kotzebue Sound. As those winds are subsiding, there's still going to be some colder northeasterly winds, but they should not be anywhere close to as strong as what you're looking at earlier in this week and through the weekend. Here's a look at the state of Alaska then, and then southeastern Alaska on that tip once again is warmer, and the frontal boundary is working itself northward, bringing that warmer and wetter air into southern sections of southeast. And once again, this is where our high wind warning is still in effect until 6 o'clock this morning. You can see the circulation here. It's pretty ragged. There's a lot of dry air being brought back into that system, and as the frontal boundary moves closer and closer to the coast, some of those winds are going to be channeled very closely to the northern edge of the Gulf, including areas just outside of Prince William Sound, around Yakutat, and areas north of Sitka there. So if you're flying tomorrow and have to traverse the northern edge of the Gulf, you're probably going to run into some bumps there, and at least a little bit of chop throughout the day, and maybe some moderate turbulence. As you look northward, you can see a lot of low clouds. Some of that is true cloud cover. Some of it's just cold air sitting across Alaska. You can see how that broke up earlier today. And across the west, another wave of cloud cover working across the west and certainly the YK coastline. Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula region, some pockets of snowfall there. And we also saw a little bit of light snow around Fairbanks today, but by and large, most of the interior is pretty dry at this point. Look out toward the Aleutians, and that frontal boundary is working its way northward, sending some cloud cover closer and closer to St. Paul. A very weak area of high pressure extends from about St. Paul through Sandpoint and into the northern sections of the Pacific. In that area, the winds are a little bit more light and variable, and they'll be shifting around for the next 24 hours, and by tomorrow afternoon, many areas in the Aleutians will be back under the influence of that frontal boundary if you're not there yet. Here's a look at today's weather map then. Low pressure at 969 millibars across the Gulf. Sounds pretty potent. With that low pressure system working its frontal boundary northward and toward the southeast. It's once again crimping the winds moving across southeastern Alaska, encouraging them to speed up, especially over southern and coastal areas of southeast. Frontal boundary working across the northern Alaska range is moving from east to west around high pressure that's sitting out across the Yukon at 1,018 millibars. A few pockets of snow had developed around Old Crow and southward. And then as you look at the Arctic coast, we see a little bit of light snow reported around Barrow earlier today and also around the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence. A lot of that again due to the 985 millibar low there across the northern Bering. A 963 millibar is a much stronger storm, though, sitting across the central Aleutians and just south. Its frontal boundary draped across the chain, and as that continues working its way northward, we'll see over the next few days that the track will eventually bring it a little bit more into what's going on in the Gulf. And what a mess this is. We have 3 areas of low pressure here, all kind of rotating in on themselves. So circling themselves, the parent low right now, 974 millibars just east of Kodiak Island tonight. The front closing in on the north and western Gulf Coast, so we will have a much better chance for coastal precipitation. Once you get into the interior, a lot of that will be a lot more scattered if more isolated at all. Some pockets of light snow around Haines and Skagway, especially at elevation, and cloud cover more than anything else across the Copper River Basin. For the interior, that dries up even more. I'll look for a cold night for you. Some pockets of snow showers just off the coast of the Chukchi Sea. And St. Lawrence Island, looking at some snow showers there, and we'll see some scattered areas of precipitation across the Aleutians. As we get into Friday, I'll look for low pressure again to continue spinning it on itself. 965 millibar low now is the dominant weather player, with waves of low pressure all the way around it. Out across the central Aleutians, spokes of that disturbance extending out across the chain and into the Bering Sea, each one of those capable of producing some more scattered precipitation. Clouds more than anything else across the west coast and Norton Sound, as well as Nome. Most areas in the interior will be dry. And wind still in the forecast for southeast. Watch for some stronger gusts, but again, at this point, we're not expecting high wind warnings for your area. Look for areas of rain and snow to develop across the Chugach Range. It still looks like most of the western side of the Kenai Peninsula, Anchorage Bowl, and the Matsu Valley will be pretty dry going into the weekend. Low pressure around the northern Gulf still hovering between 966 and 968 millibars. The weather is kind of wrapping up on itself, and as it does so, the difference between that cold and warm air is easing somewhat. We still have a little bit more of a shift here taking place across the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, and into southern parts of southeast. And once again, we'll probably see a little bit more of a surge of the wind coming into coastal sections like Craig and Klawock, maybe even Annette and Ketchikan, perhaps as far north as Sitka as we get into Saturday. So for Saturday, keep a watch for wind headlines there from the National Weather Service office in Juneau. You may have at least some advisory level winds, or maybe worse there. So just keep an eye on that if you're going to be out and about for Saturday, and winds are a factor in what you have planned for your Saturday afternoon. Out across south central, Prince William Sound, looking at some light rainfall as we get into Saturday, and for the Alaska Peninsula, some pockets of rain and snow there. Otherwise, once again, look at the interior, just dry stuff. An isolated snow shower or two are possible with the waves of low pressure moving over and west of the Yukon boundary, but it looks like most areas are looking at snow showers across the north slope, maybe some pockets of fog just off the coast of Barrow. And the Aleutians will continue to be unsettled with a north and easterly flow, enough to get the cold headed your way, but still close enough to low pressure across the Gulf to keep moisture in place. As we look at temperatures today, 30s and 40s are expected for southeast. We saw those reach around 44 in Sitka, 37 in Juneau, lower to mid 40s for parts of Annette and Ketchikan. It looks like Annette today made temperatures up toward 45 degrees. Sitka was at 46, so pretty mild stuff all the way around in southeast. 30s 20s and 30s for most of Prince William Sound. Valdez was 32, Seward 35, 37 in Homer, 28 in Kenai, low 20s for Anchorage today, 19 in Squentin, 21 in Talkeetna, and Fairbanks saw only 13 this afternoon, again with just a little bit of snow. It was 18 in Eagle. Meanwhile, Northway was sitting at 19 below, just down the Alcan border there at 3 o'clock. We look northward toward Fort Yukon with 7 above, 8 above in Bettles, 14 above in Ambler, with 5 above in AKwx Pass. The Beaufort Seacoast saw temps from 1 above to 9 below around Kaktovik and all the way out toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse and Kuparuk. 7 below for Barrow, about the same there for Atkasuk earlier today. Once you got into Kotzebue Sound, temperatures were a little bit milder, single digits and even upper teens there for Kivalina. 15 in Tin City, 24 in Nome, and teens and 20s for the Norton Sound region. It was 30 above for St. Lawrence Island there, 3 above for McGrath. Temperatures this afternoon, not terribly warm in fact, hovering in the low to mid single digits there for early in the afternoon. 20 in Bethel, 25 for Nunivak Island. Bristol Bay temps were in the upper 20s and low 30s. Most of the Alaska Peninsula saw temperatures in the mid to upper 30s today. Sandpoint in the lower 40s in fact this afternoon. 34 for Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and Acatown was not too far behind. 34 for St. Paul and St. George at 32. 37 for Adak, and it was 32 out in Shemya. Now, overnight low temperatures north of the Alaska Range will likely go well south of 0 tonight. In fact, Fairbanks looking at 10 below, about the same there for Fort Yukon. Low to mid-teens below 0 for the Arctic coast. For Nome, expect temperatures around 15 above. Bethel looking at 9. Bristol Bay in the 20s tonight. 30s for the Alaska Peninsula. 41 in Kodiak. And it looks like the Aleutians will hover in the lower 30s and maybe a little recovery tomorrow with highs closing in on 40 degrees. South Central, expect highs in the upper 20s to low 30s. Some of the warmest weather out around Kenai all the way down toward Homer. Could be above freezing there. 44 in Kodiak. Mid to upper 30s for Southeast. 43 in Sitka. The further south you go toward Craig, Klawock, Ketchikan, and Annette, you're looking at temps at least in the mid 40s, maybe milder. Around Fairbanks, 8 above, 2 below in Fort Yukon and up around the Brooks Range. Look for single-digit temps there. 5 below for Barrow, and it looks like 6 below in Wainwright with Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kuparuk closer to 5 below. Here's a look at flying weather then. IFR conditions should remain around Craig and Klawock for the coastal areas down toward the Dixon entrance and Haida Gwaii. Otherwise, it's MVFR for most areas in southeast tomorrow. Around Prince William Sound, MVFR conditions for most regions. Around Whittier and the Portage Pass expect IFR conditions, but VFR expected for Cook Inlet and the Anchorage side. As well as the west coast, coastal areas of MVFR should be expected generally west of Bethel. And around the Arctic coast, MVFR pretty much on the coastline. Once you get south of that, conditions should greatly improve, and IFR conditions west of Adak all the way out toward Shemya. Here's your pass conditions then. AKwx Pass, things should be pretty good. VFR conditions are expected there and for Adigan Pass throughout your Friday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see IFR conditions transitioning toward MVFR throughout the day. Could go back and forth a little bit, but probably ending at MVFR. Rainy Pass, we expect to see a transition toward MVFR conditions. Windy Pass looks fine. Isabel Pass looks to be VFR through your Friday. Mentasta Pass should be marginal throughout most of the day. Tanita Pass, we expect to see VFR transitioning toward MVFR conditions. And as I said, Portage Pass probably on the east side looking at instrument flight rule. VFR though for the western side if you're watching Cook Inlet. Chilkoot and White Pass, so we'll probably see a transition towards some snow or snow showers there as we get into the afternoon. So there's a possibility you'll see some IFR conditions develop there in the afternoon across northern parts of southeast. The 2,000-foot freezing line is overrunning surface freezing levels there across south central. So once again, we're into that elevated warming that produces precipitation that's not quite snow in most areas there. So keep an eye on that, and any icing potential could be enhanced because of that setup. For southeast, the 2,000-foot freezing line aloft runs right over southern sections of southeast. So we've got some warmer air still trying to build in there. Some pockets of warming taking place over Bristol Bay and that 2,000-foot line just south and west of Adak and Shemya, the surface freezing line all the way north of the St. Matthew Island waters at this point. Your icing potential shows some pockets of light to isolated moderate, mainly along the eastern Alaska Range and into parts of the Copper River Basin north of Anchorage. And you'll see some occasional to widespread moderate across Sitka all the way down toward Hyder and maybe just a little bit north of Craig and Klawock. Also across the western Bering and then just south around Kiska, some pockets of moderate icing potential there, generally above 4,000 feet. High pressure is trying to get a hold of interior Alaska. It's pretty common for this time of the year to see that dome of stable air developing thanks to the very cold setup we have. But we also have some faster moving winds on the periphery of that, and that's all kind of an extension of the ridge of high pressure that's working in from the western sections of Canada. The main point on the map, of course, is the storm track, or the jet stream, that's crossing the Pacific at this point and just pounding the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast with very active and wet weather, as you've probably seen in the news. Some of that at times is breaking off and working its way into southeast, and each time that happens, you'll have an opportunity for wind, rain, and snow coming into southern parts of southeast. So that's the weather pattern as it is, and probably will be at least going into the weekend. Now at 9,000 feet, we have a broad east to westerly flow sweeping across with pretty light winds really in most areas. Not a whole lot of gusts actually reported in the region today. Low pressure across the Gulf shows winds coming in from the south to southeast around 50 knots or so. Some stronger winds working away from the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay between 20 to as high as 50 knots, and northerlies coming off the Aleutians southward into the North Pacific between 40 and 50 knots. Light winds crossing the Brooks Range and Kotzebue Sound about 5 to 10 knots, and easterlies working across the Arctic coast, also pretty light. 3,000 feet, similar conditions there. Strongest winds right along the northern edge of the Gulf of Alaska. Wind speeds about the same, 40 to 50 knots here at 3,000 feet, and your strongest winds coming up toward Prince William Sound from Yakutat. So once again, we're going to watch for some turbulence in this area. Pretty common pattern to see there. Low pressure is working across the Bering Sea, and wind speeds not too strong in this case. You'll see around 10 to 15 knots from the east crossing St. Lawrence Island, and two other areas of low pressure across the North Pacific guiding in southeasterlies to Kodiak Island, and 15 knots coming in from the south and southeast over Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, but not too far away, an opposing northerly flow, probably closer to Akutan and Sand Point there, about north around 20 knots or so, an easterly flow also around the Pribilofs. Otherwise, southerlies and easterlies for a good chunk of the central and eastern interior. So what about turbulence? Well, as I've been pointing out, areas around southeast, the northern coastal areas of the Gulf of Alaska, all the way out toward Kodiak, probably going to deal with at least a little bit of chop tomorrow, if not widespread moderate, just as many areas in southeast saw today. Most of that's going to be below 6,000 feet. Also light to isolated moderate around Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, and then stretching up toward the Beaufort Seacoast, generally below 6,000 feet, and also a pocket of some faster moving choppy air from Kiska out toward Attu below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes right after Stargazers.
The reason for the seasons.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
Winter solstice is Sunday, December 21st, and sun worshippers can finally rejoice. This is the time when the Northern Hemisphere experiences the shortest days and longest nights.
Wait a second, rejoice? On the shortest day? What's to celebrate?
Well, every day after December 21st, the sun will get higher in the sky and stay up longer above the horizon. The sun will stop its southward migration and start heading north again.
I wish it would hurry up already. It's freezing out here.
Let's show you the reason for the seasons.
The changing seasons are caused by one thing, the 23.5-degree tilt of the Earth. As our planet rotates daily on its axis, we also revolve around the sun. But our rotational axis is tilted compared to our orbit around the sun, and we always keep this slanted view.
When we, in the Northern Hemisphere, are tilted most directly toward the sun, we soak up solar energy to the max. That day is called the summer solstice, and it occurred on June 21st this year. At this point, the sun's rays shine most directly on the Northern Hemisphere. We get more energy per square inch, and thus it's hotter.
Now, the opposite occurs when the Earth swings around to the opposite side of the sun. Here, we in the Northern Hemisphere are tilted away from the sun. The sun's rays feebly strike us at a low angle, spreading out the same energy over a larger area. Each square inch gets a lot less energy than in summer. We call this the winter solstice, and that occurs on December 21st this year.
The sun's output is the same all year round, but the difference in our seasons is how much of that energy we soak up. It has nothing to do with how close or far we are from the sun. We're closest to the sun every year in January and farthest from the sun in July. So the distance isn't the difference. Hey James, you staying cool?
The sun is blasting off my hair.
Oh, you're doing great, you're doing great. Now, let's see how our tilt affects the view from down on Earth. Sorry about your hair.
It's okay, it'll grow back. Anyway, we have our skies set to December 21st just before sunrise. Let's trace the path the sun takes across the sky on this, the shortest day of the year. The sun will rise south of east and reach its highest point in the southern sky around noon. Then the sun will set south of west.
For most of the country, you'll get about 9 to 10 hours of daylight on this day. That also means you'll get 14 to 15 hours of darkness.
Let's compare this to the spring equinox. Next year, it'll be on March 20th. Now, let's trace the pathway that the sun takes on this day. The sun will rise due east, reach its highest point above the southern horizon, and then set due west.
Notice how the sun went higher in the sky than it did in December. The higher the sun, the more direct energy we get.
And look at how much longer the sun was in the sky. 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. Equal day, equal night. That's why they call it the equinox.
What about the summer solstice? Now, our sky is set to June 21st, 2015, and we can watch the sun rise north of east, go very high in the south, and set north of west.
The sun went higher still in the sky, and the hours of daylight reach a whopping 14 to 15 hours for most of the U.S., with only 9 to 10 hours of darkness.
And all of this is caused by the 23.5-degree tilt of the Earth. So on December 21st, watch this extreme southerly sunset.
And in 6 more months, it will reach the other extreme, northernmost sunset on the summer solstice on June 21st.
Soak up the solstice sun because the longer days are returning and summer is coming. Slowly. Keep looking up.
Despite milder air working its way northward across southwestern coastline, we continue to see ice expanding across coastal regions. Most of this is pretty thin, of course, and concentrations are somewhat low. You'll notice areas of open water north of St. Lawrence Island, but it's also filling in around the coast out across the western side of the Bering Sea. So changes to come, of course, in today's Sea Ice Edge. You can always find that online at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice.php. Here's a look at southeast marine forecast now. Winds will continue to be at least at gales across some parts of the inner waterways through tonight and into early tomorrow. Storm warnings continue for areas along the coast, but those are subsiding as we get into tomorrow. We're looking at winds around 35 to 40 knots, 17 to as high as 22-foot seas there up and down the coast. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal with a 7-foot sea, and still watching for higher gusts throughout the day. By Saturday, northerlies extend a little bit further southward toward Petersburg, 30 knots there, 6-foot seas. 45-knot winds are back for the Clarence Strait. Storm force winds there, 9 to 14-foot seas are expected. Otherwise, 30 to 40-knot winds along the coast with 14-foot seas in the north and 20-foot seas outside of the Dixon entrance. And again, still watching for higher gusts there for Saturday. South Central, Prince William Sound's looking at steady southeast or northeasterlies at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. North and northeasterly winds coming down Cook Inlet, 15 to 35 knots once you get into areas west of the Barrens and into Shelikof Strait. A due east wind coming across the north and western Gulf, 35 knots there with 15 to 16-foot seas. By Saturday, a little bit of a shift. Winds diminish ever so slightly to about 20 to 30 knots. Northeasterlies continue inside of Prince William Sound, and winds anywhere from 15 to 30 knots around Cook Inlet and into Shelikof Strait. For the Alaska Peninsula, northeasterlies inside of Bristol Bay, 20 knots north of Cold Bay with a 6-foot sea. Otherwise, 15 to 20 knots in the North Pacific. West of Kodiak Island, you're looking at 8 to 11-foot seas. Those are still holding around 9 to 10 feet by Saturday. Winds become a little more light and variable from Chignik down toward Sand Point and King Cove. Otherwise, northeasterlies up toward Castle Cape, and also looking at northeasterlies at 25 knots from Bristol Bay all the way past Cold Bay and down toward Port Heiden. As you look at the marine forecast for Friday in the Aleutians, northerly is still looking good for Kiska out toward Attu, 30 knots with a 16 to 17 foot sea. North and easterly winds from Adak toward Unalaska, a variable wind south of Nikolsky at 10 knots, otherwise 10 to 13 foot seas on the south side of the chain. As we get into Saturday, you can see the shift taking place as low pressure organizes a little bit more in the Gulf. That gives us a north and northwesterly flow for most areas in the central and eastern chain. And winds are coming up a little bit more from Kiska to Attu, 35 knots there with 18 foot seas, otherwise northerlies around Unalaska, Nikolsky, and southward, looking at 20 to 30 knots with 12 to 13 foot seas, up to 14 foot seas south of the central chain. The western coast, northeasterly winds and pretty widespread area of some heavy freezing spray, probably from St. Lawrence Island down through Nunivak Island there as we get into Friday. So be careful out there if you're still running around in the open water there, especially closer to the ice edge. Northeasterlies around the Pribilofs, 6 foot seas there for Friday. That becomes 10 foot seas by Saturday with more of a northerly flow and 25 knots. Still watching for the threat for some heavy freezing spray as those winds are coming up a little bit more. 25 to 30 knots the further north you go towards St. Lawrence Island, and 6 to 8 foot seas are expected for Saturday. For the Arctic coast, a broad easterly flow sweeping over from Kaktovik to Barrow, 15 knots there. Easterlies continue just west of Wainwright, and northeasterlies inside of Kotzebue Sound at 20 knots. Those become northerly at 30 as we get into Saturday, and 20 to 25 knots are expected across the Beaufort Seacoast as we go into the first part of the weekend. Recapping tonight's weather, high wind warnings are due to expire for southern sections of southeast around Craig and Klawock. As those high winds subside a little bit, there will still be a threat for some gusts as we head into Friday, although those gusts will probably not be terribly widespread or long-lived. They may be upwards of 50 knots or so, so watch for some strong winds in the region from time to time tomorrow. As a coastal area of low pressure starts to organize a little bit more for Friday and into Saturday, you can see another front making its way into southeast, and storm warnings will be back for the Clarence Strait at least, probably watching for some other high winds in the region as we get into the first part of the weekend. Otherwise, it's coastal rain and snow for many along the Gulf, a mixture of clouds and sunshine for the interior, and spotty snow showers in the north. That's your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching. See you again after the new year.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.